it's not about the product, it's about the customer. It's about who is going to likely buy this and what is their problem that they're trying to solve. And really, as I said earlier, going and understanding the fundamental of their problem and breaking it down and working backwards from that. That sounds simple enough, but like at Unit 21, we looked at the amount of time spent getting engineering support to solve false positives. And they were getting, it was like something less than 10 hours a week to solve false positives. False positives, there's a fraud, but it really isn't fraud. And engineering needs to go in and fix the filters. And so they would have to go to engineering and go do it. And if they got more false positives, then they would spend way more time chasing ghosts that weren't real.
All right, another episode of Revenue Rebels. Today, I'm joined by Aditya Vempaty. He's the VP of Marketing at MoEngage, an insights-led customer engagement platform for marketers. Previously, he's been head of marketing at Amplitude, Synthago, and most recently, Unit 21. And today, we're going to be talking about product positioning and content programs. Aditya, welcome.
Thanks, Alan, for having me on the podcast. Really appreciate the chance to share whatever knowledge I can with folks that are tuning in. I'm going to cover a variety of topics about how I got started in marketing, as well as my thoughts on marketing the problem. I'm just excited to share my knowledge and pass it on and hopefully help other marketers out there or revenue leaders utilize the knowledge to help scale their organizations or their campaigns or their companies as well.
Really valuable experience. You have a decade's worth of marketing and leadership, so excited about this episode. Why don't we start off with a quick background about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, fun fact. I actually did electrical engineering from Georgia Tech, and I was an engineer for about 3-4 years. I like to say I was a failed engineer whose heart was captured by marketing. And for me, that led me down a path of just like, I liked coding, but at the same time, I just saw that I liked working with people on a larger scale and really understanding psychologically how they work and understanding what they care about and getting them to take certain actions to buy things or read a blog or convert on emails, etc. And that led me down the path of going from an engineer into actually an SDR, and then led me down into demand gen and managing a team of SDRs and going from there and progressing on to running entire marketing organizations. And it was very much just understanding human psychology. And then this was at a time where marketers weren't as data driven, or I would say data informed. And I was pretty data informed, having that analytical mindset of a engineer, and then pretty decently creative in trying to combine that. So I was very quick to experiment, look at if the data made sense, and then iterate. And my engineering skill set, I think, really allowed me to have the structure of using numbers and calculating formulas, while my curiosity led me to being very, I would say, creative in trying different various things and not being afraid to try those out and measuring them in a quantifiable way, if it was working or not. And that led me to transition from engineering to marketing.
I think it's got to be one of the most interesting paths into marketing. I actually followed this myself, having been an engineer and then CTO and now head of marketing at Warmly. Would love to just dive into this topic a little bit more. What do you think has been one of the benefits of coming from an engineering background?
Yeah, I think a key benefit is when you come from an engineering background, engineers are trained to go solve problems. And they're trying to solve problems in a systematic way where it's repeatable and you're able to replicate it. And that, I think, actually shows up in marketing more than people understand. And that's where, as a marketer, I'm often like, hey, people have a certain problem. Yes, you want to sell your product, you want to get in front of them. But what I've realized was they have a problem, they're trying to solve it. So how do you appeal to them psychologically and understand how their buying process works? And the engineering side of taking that entire process and breaking it down and knowing when to engage them and how to engage them and where to engage them has been, I would say, really key in standing out as a marketer versus just as an engineer. And that's where the engineering skill sets of breaking the problem down are so key in marketing.
It's really fascinating to have that perspective. At the end of the day, we're trying to solve problems for our customers. Engineers are some of the best people at solving problems. And sometimes as a marketer, I even forget, like, I'm here to solve their problem, not solve the whole marketing, do marketing, build stuff. No, it's about them. So great.
Exactly. It's very much about them. You nailed it. And as an engineer, what's funny is engineers like solving problems because it's fun, but they also inherently solve problems that help people. And the sad fact about marketing is I think marketers often forget and they start marketing, say, I like, this is cool, but they forget to stop and say, wait, what does the other person care about? Why would they care about that? Why would it matter to them?
Yes, definitely. So, not just marketers, but founders as well. We're all guilty of it. We try to build products that we want to see out in the world, but it doesn't actually solve a customer's problem. So
yeah, exactly.
Great benefit comes from engineering. Let's dive into the main topic and let's talk about this. So product positioning, how do you start off?
Yeah, look, the product positioning, starting off right now, that's like a vast question. It's like almost like existentially, like, what is the meaning of life in some instances, right? Like, but here, like, really thinking about product positioning, there's some fundamentals, right? People like say, oh, if you're marketing a product, like it's about the positioning, the placement, and the persona. And I take a different stance of it. I really think about, it's not about the product, it's about the customer. It's about who is going to likely buy this and what is their problem that they're trying to solve. And really, as I said earlier, going and understanding the fundamental of their problem and breaking it down and working backwards from that. And oftentimes that really requires speaking to a lot of people in the space who are decision makers and supporting them in understanding the nuance of what is the core issue they're trying to get at. And is there one? Is there many? Or when does the core issue arrive and when is it not an issue? And is it something they're willing to pay money for? And this is something that deeply matters and something that I think is really key. And if you can't sit there and go back and discover the problem to what they're willing to pay for and what they're willing to spend money on, it gets to be an issue. And that's why usually we spend time taking surveys and being like, cool, what is the actual problem you have? And not just saying, hey, what is your problem? What are the 3 things you want to solve? More, hey, this is a problem. Is this a problem that you're willing to pay for? Is this a problem that you have a metric that you're measuring against and that you are measured for? And if you solve this problem, does this positively impact your brand and your perception in the company? And getting to that level of insight, and then you can see what actually matters to them versus what's surface level. And once you understand that, then you start marketing around the actual core problem because they're motivated to solve it. And they're motivated to spend the time, money, and effort to fix it because they're going to look good, it's going to make their life easier, and it's actually going to move the needle for them in some way or form that's measurable. And so that's where once you find that, you can start meeting them where they are. And as they understand the problem, you understand the problem and you deliver content that resonates with them, then you can start talking about positioning your company around that problem and your product around the problem. So I can't hear you, Alan.
Sorry, not sure how that could happen, but we'll cut that out. Yeah, so this is really great insight. Finding the problem is probably where the war is actually won or lost. And I think a lot of companies don't spend enough time diagnosing what the problem is, and oftentimes it's solutioning around how we could solve the problem. Can we go through a couple of questions that you've asked on your most recent survey at MoEngage to help narrow down the problem?
Yeah, I'll give a simple example. There's many nuances to it. We're asking people, hey, what channels do you use in marketing? And we want to understand, like, what are the channels that really matter to them, what don't? And typically, you would just ask the question of, hey, what are the top channels you use in cross-channel marketing? And you'll get a bunch of response. But to truly understand what matters to them, you have to change it a little. You have to start a little bit of different. Hey, what are the most effective channels for you in your cross-channel marketing efforts? And when you make that change and ask what are the most effective, you're getting them to think about what's working for them or not working for them and give you that insight. And the next thing is we ask, can you list the top 5 that are effective for you? So then this makes them think, oh, if I'm getting asked this question, then others that are taking this survey get asked this question, and they're going to share the findings with me. This is going to be something of deep value to me. So the answers get to be more sophisticated, nuanced, and simple, and you get to the core of what they care about. So that's one question. That let us know what people really care about in terms of what solves it for them or doesn't solve it for them, and what are the key problems they're looking to solve, and what are the channels that are effective. Then another question that we asked was, we're trying to understand, like, what does their software stack look and what matters to them when they're thinking about making a purchase for cross-channel marketing or customer engagement. And typically you say, oh, what do you look for in purchasing a customer engagement product? And that answer will make them feel like it's very that question will make them feel like it's very salesy, that you're trying to sell them something. So we asked them, hey, what are the things that matter to you if you're thinking about making a new software, thinking about replacing your current customer engagement platform? And we listed a few options and we asked them to rank it, right? And we don't do it that often because also you don't want them to make it too tedious to give you the information. So you use this question very sparingly and this format. But when you ask them that, they sit and actually be like, oh, this one matters to me. This doesn't matter to me. I ask them to rank it from a scale of 1 to 5. And of not important at all to very important. And put a few features for software. And having a question set up that way gets to the heart of what they care about. Versus just saying, hey, what would make you switch your software vendors? Or what do you look for in a new software vendor? And having them like, I look for this and this. We want them to actually spend a little time in the key areas. Not in all questions. But that gets you those insights so you can get to that problem and you can understand their psyche.
I have this question around whether or not how much to listen to the customers, because they might say they want something.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's not really what they want. I always have this idea that language is your product when they haven't tried out your product. And the language that they use to describe their problem is, if you act on it, then that will ultimately be your product. But what if it's not the right thing to be building in the first place? So how do you resolve that?
Yeah, that's a great point, right? So one, you do the survey, like I've done that. Then the next thing is actually picking out a few survey respondents that have said things that you find interesting or are at companies and have a persona that you want to go engage with, and going ahead and saying, hey, would you spend half an hour with me talking through things? And asking them, how are you, if this is a problem, how is it measured? Are you willing to spend time and energy to solve this problem either through money or resources or services? And what would you pay? And usually when you can triangulate around like how they're measuring that problem currently internally, will they back money behind it or resources? And are they really willing to pull the trigger? You can figure out, is this the real issue or not? Or the next thing I usually find is when we do those interviews, double clicking into it, I actually find like it is a tertiary problem and there's a deeper problem. And this is just, and so when we find that out in the qualitative state, that helps quite a bit.
How do you know if you have something that's red hot versus yellow versus neutral? Is there some sort of heuristic in your mind of triangulating that?
Yeah, it's like, how do you know if something is really burning pain or like semi or not at all? The question that really comes about, this may sound really simple, but is that, are they measuring that metric and do they have to report on it? And oftentimes when they have a pain and they don't really have to report on it, but it's very subjective and people are feeling the pain, especially in like larger organizations, they're probably not going to get the budget to solve that pain. And that is probably not a real pain. And I know it sounds really simple, but if others aren't seeing the metric and they're not tracking it, then they're not going to put the money or budget behind it to solve that. And then it's just, it's an upper, harder battle, and it's not like the true pain, and you got to go dig in and find out what that true pain is. And ask them, like, how are they measured? If this is a pain, but it's not measured, then what is measured that this pain is impacting? And how would they go ahead and how would that metric move if this was solved? And would they be willing to pay to move that metric? Now this pain no longer matters, but that metric matters. And if this can move it, then will they be willing to pay for it? And I know, like I said, it sounds simple enough, but like at Unit 21, we looked at the amount of time spent getting engineering support to solve false positives. And they were getting, it was like something less than 10 hours a week to solve false positives. False positives, there's a fraud, but it really isn't fraud. And engineering needs to fix go in and fix the filters. And so they would have to go to engineering and go do it. And if they got more false positives, then they would spend way more time chasing ghosts that weren't real. And Unit 21 sold software where you could go fix those filters yourself as a risk or fraud expert, and you didn't have to wait for engineering. So if we could allow you to self-serve and reduce your dependency on engineering, then we knew people would spend more money and buy it. And so that's the metric we used. And that's what we went out and said, hey, did you know that average fraud or risk expert gets less than 10 hours of support a week from engineering to actually identify false positives? And that everyone's, whoa, that's me. I deal with that. I need more help. How do you think about this?
Yep. I love this point about if it's not tied to a metric that you report on, then it's going to have less likelihood of getting budget.
Yeah.
So Before we dive into the next section, what was MoEngage's problem or pain that you guys crystallized on?
Yeah, so I think with MoEngage, what we really crystallized on, if you sat back and looked at everything, was that people know they have to do, for us, they have to do cross-channel marketing, but they aren't able to understand what channels are effective, and they aren't able to understand what channels are allowing them to convert their customers. And the last part is that they're not able to actually understand the user journey and see where what's converting and what's not converting and where to put their budget and not. And this, I think, a real quick way of saying is that they're focused on acquiring new customers because they don't understand how to retain or drive engagement with current one. And they're spending, it was something like 60% of their time and budget on new acquisition of new customers and only 40% on retaining and trying to drive loyalty with current one. And the part that we found out was it costs 5 to 10x more to get a new customer and then retain a current. So then we started really focusing and saying, hey, you need to start thinking about retention while acquiring new customers. And to do that, you need a cross-channel customer engagement strategy and marketing. So a little long-winded, but that's what it summarized to.
Makes sense. Okay, diving into the next section. Now that we have the problem that we're solving and the unique insight and the perspective of how to language it, how do we develop a content program to educate the audience on the problem and the solution that you just mentioned?
Yeah, so it's really thinking about, like, hey, what is the content that really matters to them? We talked about the problem. Now, how do they consume that content, and what does that content look like? Is it a podcast? Is it a webinar? Is it an events? Is it a one-pager? Is it blog content? You need to also understand that part. And in the survey, we also asked that too, to be like, where do you actually consume content? What's the content that you care about? And before making a decision, what's the content you look at to educate yourself? And based on that, we start developing content around that. And we say, okay, let's take a topic or pain point. Like here, I said earlier, it is to like, let's talk about why retention and loyalty matters and how cross-channel marketing to drive retention or loyalty requires customer engagement, and start writing about that and start writing about it for each vertical. Then looking at that and saying, cool, how do we engage people that consume it on a webinar side, or that consume it on a blog, or that consume it on LinkedIn, or a one pager? And how do we develop those assets accordingly? And do that for those verticals and bring in customers that talk about how to drive retention and loyalty, let's say in a webinar with an influencer. And so our content isn't just like words, it's in various formats. And how do we do it? Every month, have a webinar, have a stream of blogs, 4 or 5 that come out every month on this problem in a different lens, and have like PDFs or one pagers also from those blogs or from the webinar. So that way, where people how they consume content is where we're meeting them with the problem that they're trying to learn and educate themselves on. And looking at it and just to be clear, it's thinking about it like, how do I constantly have a drumbeat so they feel like we're giving them something of value constantly before we ask for anything back? So it's very much about them and their problem, and they are Luke Skywalker, we're Yoda. We're just here to help you. You're the hero. We want to make sure you succeed, and we're just back.
Do you have a way? So my guess is that you have different content for different stages of their own buyer journey, applying your own problem and solution that you're solving. So how do you think about creating content depending on their stage? Maybe awareness versus bottom of the funnel. Do you think about it that way?
We do. And what's actually unique is we always try to start with bottom and middle of funnel before we go to top of funnel. The reason being is if you do top of funnel, it takes you longer to know if your content's resonating. Whereas if you do middle and bottom, this is high intent content. Like if someone is looking for, I'll give you an example, customer engagement platform for cross-channel marketing in retail. That is a very long tail, high intent keyword. And if you write for that and rank for that and develop content for that on YouTube, and it resonates in conversions, that's working. And that's why you start bottom to middle funnel before you go to top. And top is always last because that has a broader net. You're going to get a lot of people in, but they're not going to convert as much. And the other side is you have to make sure your sales compatriots know what you're doing is working. So you have to start with bottom to get them some wins on the board right away and then go up top.
Can we talk a little bit about actually the details of how you instrument the system to see if your content is converting? I know it sounds obvious, it's probably book meeting or close one, but how do you do it? What systems do you use? What's the process?
Yeah, it's a combination, right? If you look at it, when you put the content out, first you analyze, you want the hardcore of it. Hardcore, you look at the topic clusters you want to rank for that are associated with the problems that you've discovered. Then you take those topic clusters, right? And you look at all the keywords in these topic clusters and you look at the volumes that they have. Then you take the volumes for the keywords in the topic clusters and then develop a 3 to 6 month content plan. And that content plan in the topic clusters has the problems, like I was saying, and it has the keywords and the volume associated with those problems. And then the content plan is, I'm going to do blogs. I'm going to do webinar. I'm going to do videos that are short form. And looking at how you're going to start rolling that out and using a cadence of newsletters every week with the new blog or webinar or video. Then the next part is making sure that your SDRs and AEs are using it to outbound people, right? So that way it isn't just content living out there, it's used and your AEs and SDRs are delivering value and they engage people with it. And then last but not least, getting it out there into the hands of where the watering holes are. And so the process is like, you use HubSpot to send the emails, you use Salesforce to monitor if you're actually getting these deals in for these campaigns and they're becoming ops, and then putting it into outreach so SDRs and AEs can use these links accordingly with the messaging that you have. So that's like a hyper detailed version of it.
And then how do you know if the content is resonating? Let's say it's middle of the funnel content or it's bottom of the funnel, but they came to the site and you can't really, how do you know if the words is resonating, the theming and
Yeah, so that's the interesting, right? There's two ways to look at it. One is, are you getting leads from it? That's like a lagging indicator, right? Indicator is A, is it ranking? B, is it starting to get traffic? If you see those signals, then the next signal is, do you start seeing lead come from it?
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Cool.
Yeah.
Now that we've got the content, all the assets in place, let's talk about distribution.
Yeah. This is my fun part. This is where I think a lot of marketing is actually changing. And I think how marketing in B2B is done is going, a lot of people don't see it, but in the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to change. And I believe fundamentally, it's going to become more influencer based. It's going to become more micro influencers and people that have a voice who others trust because they either know them or they've interacted with them or they built a career in this. And I think they are going to be the watering holes. They are where you go to find an audience because they're building their own audience. And there's a real creator economy in B2B more than anybody else. And LinkedIn knows it. They've been playing their game for 2-3 years already. So that's where I think distribution is going to happen. I'm not saying LinkedIn, but I'm saying influencers who have the watering holes for these specific industries and verticals. And almost to the point, you'll have people that are marketers in retail that are, let's say, performance marketers. Like you'll have those influencers and you have MarTech folks in retail who are influencers. You'll have to go to them for watering holes. And I think it's going to get that granular over the next 2 to 3 years. And I'm seeing a little bit of it already. And that's what we spend a lot of time in distribution, is making sure we are friends with these influencers and we are putting good content that they want to share with their audience. And that is how we're trying to build our brand, and our credibility is utilizing their brand and their credibility by giving things of value to their audience.
Let's talk about this for a second. Influencer channel is really popular right now. How do you create this influencer program? What do you do? Talk to them for 15 minutes?
The thing is, a lot of B2B influencers are relatively very new compared to B2C influencers. They're just getting started and they're more protective of their brand than I would say B2C is, because B2C knows what to do, not to do, and they know there's like a bar that has to be met. Whereas B2B influencers are like, is it something of value? I'm not going to go out there and just say MoEngage is the greatest thing in the world, or Unit 21 is awesome. Like, we were there. It was like, hey, is your content of value? Is this something cool? Is this something unique? Are you saying things that give value to my audience? And that is, we go find these influencers, and when we work with them, that's like the first question they ask. Is this going to be valuable to my audience? Is this something that my audience cares about? I don't care if you paid me money or not. I don't want to do wrong by my audience. And it's where they're almost like, right now, it's unique stuff is what's going to get you attention, and it's pay to play. There's no free lunch in B2B, and there shouldn't be. It has to be good, and and these influencers make a living off that, so you got to pay them for it as well.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's something I've seen as well, that for influencers, especially in B2B and on LinkedIn, they are trying to build their own brand. So can we tie this all together? Once we've instrumented the system of, we have found the right product positioning against our competitors and exactly what our audience is looking for, we've created the right content, top, middle, bottom, and we distributed across the right channels that people want to listen from. What does the final product look like?
The biggest thing is like, how do you know if you succeeded, right? It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take 3 to 6 months at least. And what you've succeeded is when you start getting people saying, hey, you have really good content. Oh, I saw your content. Oh, wow, I really like your newsletter. You'll start hearing these tidbits more. And I know it sounds truly like colloquial, but that's how you know things are working. And your sales team, when they're sending their content out that you created, they get feedback saying, I really liked reading this. This is really good. And that's like the feedback loop of positivity that you'll start getting. But it'll take 3 to 6 months for that to happen on a continuous drumbeat every week of releasing new content across various channels. So you're not going to have one metric that's going to move the needle. You'll see the traffic, but you really care in this day and age. The distribution of content is one thing, but like, how does it set your brand up and position your brand and then therefore your product in the buyer's mind? And you'll start seeing that with how they talk about your company and what it's doing through the channels you're pushing content out. Metric wise, yeah, I'm getting more traffic, I'm getting more conversions, but that brand perception happens when people interact and engage and tell you that what you're doing is working for them.
Yeah, I see this a lot in the LinkedIn. Sometimes people ask, what's the best tool for X? And then they'll list like 3 companies. And
yeah,
if you're on that short list, they'll do a pretty good job of positioning.
Exactly. And it's I know it's simple, but man, the simplest way to explain something is often the hardest way to get there. To be like one of those 3, you got to do a lot of work and be where those people are and get those reviews and get that word of mouth.
Yeah, been such a pleasure talking with you about product positioning.
You can go to my linkedin.com/Aditya Vempaty. Send me a message. I'm on Twitter, AVEMI. Always happy to pay it forward. Any advice people need, just message me. I'm pretty easy to reach in that sense. A lot of people have helped me in my career get to where I am right now, and I always love paying it back and paying it forward.
Thank you for paying it forward. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for having me.